So this is a curveball that you may or may have not been expecting today. We got the Patreon request from Hayden. He says, if Nasu were to hand over the pen and ask you to create the next Lostbelt or Singularity, what part of history would you want to do? What changes to said history would happen? What servants would be present? And what role would they play? Feel free to get creative with it. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your request. An entire chapter from the ground up. Man, there's so many things that haven't been touched upon, but I will say I have had a couple of things that I always wanted to see, whether they decided to do it all in one chapter or not. So I'll kind of just go forward with a few of them here. And as you can already tell, that being a chapter centered around the moon. And you already know if we're going to the moon, you have to know that I mean centered around the Apollo 11 mission, where the astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon. It would also be his pilot, Buzz Aldrin, because he was also present along with others, but those are the two that I really want to prioritize. And we can just assume through some type of intervention that instead of coming back to Earth like the crew normally would, they decide to stay on the moon. And the reason being is that they are convinced it would be for the betterment of mankind. They come across a relic, and this relic would strengthen the livelihood of humanity for forever. On the flip side, in order to get the relic going, it has to have a civilization built upon it in order to manifest that energy. So that's what they'll be doing here. The main idea, naturally, is making the moon inhabitable. Well, how do we get this civilization going? And that is where we bring some of the smartest people of mankind into the chapter in order to work things out. So that means some of the best inventors, the engineers, the scientists from all types of times. It doesn't really matter in particular, just the best of their kind. Just given the people that we've had to work with already, Edison would be at the head of this. And the reason being is that Edison is noted to be the king of inventors. But instead of being the lion head that he was in the fifth singularity, this will be the actual original Edison in his prime form. All of these builders for this civilization will need to be in their prime form, and they're all going to be forms that are brand new. So that's Prime Edison, Prime Tesla, Archimedes from Extella, Paracelsus, Victor Frankenstein, the one that created the monster Frankenstein. He's going to be on the list. He's going to be a part of this group that helps bring all of this together. So he'll finally get a servant form, Babbage, Jekyll and Hyde if need be, and even a Da Vinci altar. But once again, this time around, Da Vinci is actually going to be in his original form. So he will be a man, and he will be more in line with his original self. And it doesn't have to stop there. That's just most of the servants that's already been presented to us. I want Moses to be there. Reason being, well, there's really multiple. He already existed beforehand, but they haven't really gave him much in the verse. So I kind of want to expand his background a bit. And the main thing here is that he's going to be playing off of his part in the Testament, where he struck the rock and brought water for the new world. And so that's exactly what's going to happen here. He's going to use his staff once again, and that will strike a miracle on the moon via the influence of God to supply this never-ending resource of water. So that's taken care of. We're going to have a servant. I don't know which servant in particular at this point in time, but there's going to be a servant that supplies a reality marble over the moon in order for this new civilization to live along with everybody else. And then the flip side to the Moses thing, if you know about what happened later on, Moses struck the rock again, and he actually ended up getting cursed by God, and this is why he didn't get into the lands himself. So that will also be taken into account, and that will also be present in the chapter. Moses will have a grand miracle left, but he can only use it one time, and once he uses it, it's gonna curse him and everybody else that's there. And that can latch on to the events that occur later on in the story. As far as Neil Armstrong goes, he too was also present in the verse. He was back in Fate Extra. Shinji was the one to hint at him first when we were first understanding the world, and we even got a depiction of him in the adaptation later on when that came out. So Neil Armstrong did exist, but he was more so of a cameo more than anything. Right here, we want to make him an actual person. Most likely, he'll be the one that's at the head of things, since not only would he be the first on the moon because of the mission, but also him finding this relic would make him even more so one of the most critical people to mankind, because it would elevate mankind like no other. At least that's what he believes. So going through the mental process of this coming about, and this is just the way that my mind works. My mind works in like 80 million different ways. I told you guys I don't write, and this is part of the reason why. If I think in 80 different ways, I have to do all of them. But then the point gets lost. And after that, all of those things don't matter. When I think of the moon, well, if I'm going to the moon, I have to involve some type of alien existence, because the fuck am I going to the moon for if I'm not gonna bring up aliens? I could have just stayed on Earth. That's the way I'm looking at it. Another thing is the moon cell. I just feel like I have to attach this to the moon cell, because we know that plays a pivotal role in the verse. We know how important the moon is in the verse. And then third, the crimson moon. Now, of course, the crimson moon is entirely different. It's always been stated to be more of a metaphysical place, but it's just the idea of the concept of the moon in general. I can't help but think of the crimson moon, the dead apostles, the demon lords, so on and so forth. And so that makes me want to bring that in too. All of this is just the premise. I just feel like all of these things are really good ideas that honestly haven't been explored that much. And by the way, the person that put the Apollo mission in place was President JFK, John F. Kennedy. So we would get our first actual president and not the Prez-a-King. Now, granted, we have had mentions of a president, but none actually in name. They mentioned the president in Strange Fate and in some other places, but they never put a name to it. Strange Fate takes place in 2009. In 2009, that would be Barack. But they do have a lot of conversations in regards to the president and a lot of other federal groups. So just looking at it up front, we got Moses, JFK, the male Da Vinci altar, Neil Armstrong, ton of new people to bring into the circle. And another thing, if you never heard of it, there's another type moon work, Suki no Sango. And in Sango, the idea of building cities on the moon was already present, multiple of them in fact. So no different from the extra timeline, this isn't anything unfamiliar. The character that Suki no Sango is centered around, that being the man of Earth, and he can also be present to provide information on a lot of the things that he had to deal with, and he can sort of be the person that gives that neutral standing ground to everything that's now going on. And then on the other side, as far as the apostles go, you could possibly have the apostles trying to take over the relic in order for them to gain influence on Earth before Neil and his people are able to use it, because with the Crimson Moon naturally being aware of this, he's gonna want in, and this would work as a perfect way for them to gain the dominance on Earth that they already wanted via the Velesti ritual. So it will be similar to the ritual, but not exactly the same. Kind of like a roundabout way of them getting to the same destination. But honestly, in this case, I think they would get there way faster. So they're looking at it as a method that they just can't deny. They can't turn it down. And also, we still have to get into a lot of the elder dead apostle ancestors, because we do have some of those. We have some elder dead apostle ancestors that we don't know about that are over 4,000 years old. Honestly, wouldn't mind seeing at least one of those. We're probably not going to see that until 2050 anyway, and things can turn out a lot differently now that this has happened. JFK, for example, he's going to be the man down on Earth, because his whole thing was, well, I'm going to put somebody on the moon before the decade is out, and now he's done that and then some, and all of this is under his name. Of course, the Apollo team is going to keep their connection. They're going to keep communications back with Earth. This is such a high level of a feat that the people may possibly try to keep Kennedy as president forever, because they haven't seen anything like this. Things like that is gonna throw the timeline in different directions. And you might be asking, well, how do you get JFK the servant if JFK is still there? And that's just the thing, he isn't. We have to do an Emmia situation where the servant is gonna get rid of the real thing. And it's funny I say that, because I was just talking about I'm not a fan of people stealing flows, but the only reason I'm doing this is because the Apollo mission coincides with JFK still being alive, and you can't help that. Like, he's the one that sent out the mission. So in order to get the servant, which I do still want, he would have to be the one that carries out that assassination on himself, but in the dark. Because I do want the servant form to be the one addressing the communications and holding the audience. It would just be much more livelier that way. And I'm not saying that his servant form has to get rid of his human self in order to exist. I just know him doing that would cause greater fluctuations in the timeline and fast. If we continue to go by Sango, we know that these cities, they were built upon technology that is akin to perpetual motion machines, a lot like what you get out of the third magic. Now, we don't necessarily have to go bar for bar with it being the same thing, but I definitely could see the team of inventors that we established from before building something very similar with what they have in order to keep it going. It doesn't have to be that many cities. It doesn't have to be a huge civilization. They just have to establish that connection with the relic and keep it going in order for everything that all of them have put in to be worth it. But like I said, you got Neil on one side, you got the Crimson Moon on the other side, and then you have the Man of Earth in the middle trying to balance things out. And that really could go either way. When it comes to the civilization itself, I'm thinking JFK is going to recognize how good Apollo 11 went, and he's going to go ahead and ready up this second project of sending out these test subjects for this next civilization, for this alien race. Of course, there are going to be people that volunteered. They're going to get sent over, and once they get there inside the marble, after being there for a while, their DNA is going to get tampered with, and then their offsprings will be the ones that lead into the moon people race. As a nod to these inventors and the tech of this new civilization, there's going to be a lot of things that's unfamiliar to us. We're not just going to be able to brawn our way through. Some parts of the chapter, we're really going to have to put our heads together. You know, we go to war often, and that usually bails us out the situation. Except here, I mean, if you were to take a page out the extra book, they're going to be filled with riddles, puzzles, and certain concepts that only the moon people would know. Can't really get into particulars, but I definitely want the moon people to look and feel like a different race entirely. I want the offsprings to end up in a situation where they didn't go as expected, and so they look and feel as alien as they're supposed to. I barely even want them to be humanoid, but they're not gonna look like us, they're not gonna talk like us, so they're not just carbon copies of us with additional features like most moon men usually are. Just something to make it really feel worth it. It would likely have to be more of a singularity because, well, if it isn't, there would be no JFK to talk to because Earth is white, among other things. Something of the sort.